He was celebrated as the conscience of a nation, a voice trusted by presidents, a preacher who spoke to millions about faith, time, and the fragile nature of life. He warned the world that life is short and every day matters. Yet far from the bright lights and public praise, another story was quietly unfolding, one kept out of sight for almost 100 years. On stage, he urged people to love one another, to help one another, and to live the way Jesus taught. His words sounded pure, steady, and unshakable. But when sealed records were finally unlocked, a different picture began to take shape, one far more layered, deeply human, and shocking than any message ever delivered from a pulpit. The man behind the sermons was not as simple as the image the world had embraced. Now it's time to walk into that hidden chapter and confront the truth. Many call him America's pastor, but that title barely scratches the surface. This is the story of a life divided, public faith on one side, private struggle on the other, and a reminder that even the most admired figures can carry secrets history never forgets. Long before the world knew his name, Billy Graham was just a farm boy. He came into the world in 1918 on a wide dairy farm outside Charlotte, North Carolina. Surrounded by open fields and quiet mornings, he grew up learning how to stand on his own feet. Farm life made him tough, self-reliant, and unyielding long before he understood what those traits meant. 3 values quietly shaped his early years: humility, honesty, and generosity. By the time Billy was 8, hard work was already part of his daily life. The farm smelled of hay, sweat, and long hours. Money was scarce, but discipline was not. His father ruled with firmness, convinced that character came from labor. His mother, in contrast, was calm and loving, ending every day on her knees in prayer. That difference planted a silent struggle inside Billy. At school, he wasn't known for brilliance. Books bored him, and Bible lessons held little appeal. He preferred jokes, pranks, and chasing thrills. Sneaking beer and driving around with friends felt far more exciting than church. Grown-ups often shook their heads and said, "That boy is stubborn as a mule." Billy wore the label proudly. As the Great Depression tightened its grip on America, his parents worked even harder to keep the farm alive. Watching this made Billy question everything his mother believed. Prayer, to him, seemed useless against real problems. He often joked that faith was a comfort for people who couldn't face reality. One night, he overheard his mother praying for him. He said nothing, but the moment stayed with him. Years later, he admitted he once believed her faith belonged to a fearful past, not the modern world. By 15, Billy was full of energy and restless ambition. He drove trucks, played baseball, and placed small bets with friends. Rules didn't interest him. Religion felt like a cage. Life, in his mind, was about freedom and enjoyment. Records from those years describe him as a regular drinker and gambler, someone who stayed out late and ignored advice. He wasn't dangerous, just difficult. In Charlotte, he became known as the boy no one could teach. Whenever his mother warned him, he laughed it off. "God has bigger things to worry about," he'd say. On scorching afternoons, Billy stretched out on the barn roof, watching clouds drift by, dreaming of escape. He didn't want the farm life or his father's future. He only knew one thing: he wanted more, though he couldn't name what that more was. In 1933, a small moment changed something inside him. He placed a $5 bet on a baseball game and lost every cent he had saved. Later, he wrote that although he laughed with his friends, a strange emptiness followed him home. For the first time, he realized that short-lived pleasure left a hollow space behind. Still, he pushed the feeling aside and returned to his routine. No faith, no Bible, just work and distraction. Everything shifted the following year. One fall evening in 1934, Billy and his friends went to a revival meeting under a large tent, not out of belief, but for entertainment. Thousands gathered as preacher Mordecai Ham spoke about sin and redemption. Billy scoffed and plans to leave early. Then the hymn began. Suddenly, his feet wouldn't move. An invisible weight settled over him, holding him there. He stood frozen, eyes shut, heart heavy. He went home without a word. The next morning, he opened his mother's worn Bible and began to read. He didn't understand why. From that point on, he started attending church regularly. His friends noticed the change. He talked less, worked harder, and filled notebooks after sermons. One note simply said, "I don't know what happened, but maybe I finally met myself." That night marked the beginning of Billy Graham's lifelong journey, not just toward God, but to understanding who he truly was. In 1936, he left home for Bob Jones College, a place famous for strict rules and rigid discipline. Billy questioned too much, challenged too often, and refused blind obedience. The principal told him he was too stubborn to ever preach. Within months, Billy was asked to leave. But quitting was never his nature. He moved on to the Florida Bible Institute instead. There, each evening, he walked alone by the Hillsborough River, preaching to the darkness. He listened to his voice parry through the night air, refining every word, every pause. Unknown to him then, those quiet rehearsals were shaping a voice the world would one day stop to hear. This was the season when his gift truly took shape. During this time, he sharpened the ability that would later move millions. Not long after, invitations began to arrive, asking him to speak at small student meetings. His height was noticeable, his voice carried authority, and his eyes reflected conviction. At first, only a handful of people showed up. Then the numbers slowly increased. Over time, Billy discovered something powerful. Faith wasn't carried by fancy words, but by the sincerity of the person speaking them. It was also during this chapter of his life that he met Ruth Bell. She was the daughter of a medical missionary who had spent years in China. Ruth was gentle, thoughtful, and deeply rooted in her beliefs. They connected almost instantly, united by a shared desire to serve God. More than anyone else, Ruth became the one person Billy trusted completely. By 1940, he had completed his studies and was officially ordained as a probationary pastor.
Soon after, Billy took to the road, preaching across the Midwest. His setup was modest, just a microphone, a few speakers, and a small truck, but his message carried far. He organized open-air gatherings wherever he could, and each time, hundreds came to listen. In 1943, he and Ruth were married. Their bond was built on shared purpose, but it wasn't always easy. Billy was constantly traveling, while Ruth stayed behind, raising their children alone. Yet she never complained. Instead, she saw her role as part of the mission. 2 years later, in 1945, Billy was asked to become the director of Youth for Christ. He traveled non-stop, speaking to young people across the country. This period changed him. His messages became sharper, clearer, and more powerful, turning simple sermons into words that stayed with people long after he left the stage. Billy came to understand that faith was more than tradition. It was hope spoken out loud. He once said, "If I can help even one person find meaning in life, then every sermon is worth it." That belief shaped everything he did afterward. In 1947, he was appointed head of the theology department at Northwestern College in Minnesota. At just 29 years old, he became the youngest person ever to hold that position. Newspapers began paying attention to his confident and relatable teaching style, which felt refreshing compared to rigid traditions. Still, Billy felt restless. Academic life didn't fulfill him. His heart was with people who felt lost and were searching for direction. After 2 years, he stepped away, choosing crowds over classrooms and open fields over lecture halls. Then came September 1949 in Los Angeles. Billy pitched a tent on an empty lot and planned a 3-week revival, but something unexpected happened. The crowds kept coming. The meeting stretched from 3 weeks to 8. By the end, more than 350,000 people had attended, drawn by messages of faith, forgiveness, and renewal. Newspapers called it the miracle of the canvas tent. In that moment, Billy Graham went from a little-known preacher to a national name. From that tent in Los Angeles, his life changed forever. The world opened its doors, bringing both influence and pressure. In 1950, he founded the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association in Minneapolis. With a growing team behind him, he launched large-scale campaigns across the globe. The goal was simple: take the message of faith beyond church walls and into everyday life. Starting in 1954, Billy began traveling internationally through Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America.
Everywhere he went, massive crowds gathered. By the late 1970s, he had spoken in over 185 countries, reaching more than 215 million people face to face. His name became worldwide. When he stood before crowds that stretched as far as the eye could see, his voice never wavered. He avoided complicated rituals and didn't push denominations. His focus stayed on salvation alone. That simplicity made his message universal. Soon, world leaders took notice. Over the years, Billy Graham met with presidents like Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Reagan, proof that his influence had reached far beyond the pulpit. He started as a quiet advisor, then slowly became the man presidents turned to when they needed prayer before life-changing choices. In 1954, while speaking in Bombay, chaos broke out when a bomb exploded close to the stage. Fear swept through the crowd, yet Billy remained steady and continued his message. No one was injured. Later, instead of holding anger, he visited the man who planted the bomb in prison and prayed with him. That single act strengthened his reputation as calm, fearless, and deeply compassionate. Billy often reminded people, "I'm just the messenger, not the savior." That belief guided him as his influence grew. In 1956, NBC offered him a deal worth $1 million to host his own television program. He turned it down, saying faith was never something to be sold. Some admired his decision, but others felt he was too rigid. To protect his character, he set strict personal rules: never be alone with another woman, refuse expensive gifts, and avoid luxury hotels. Everyone in the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association followed these rules to prevent scandal and preserve trust. In 1957, he invited Martin Luther King Jr. to stand beside him on stage, creating the first major religious event in America with a fully integrated audience. Critics were loud at the time, but history later honored the moment. Years later, in 1973, Billy traveled to North Korea, met President Kim Il-sung, and prayed for peace. The visit shocked the world and was seen as a bold step beyond politics. For more than 30 years, Billy and his organization raised hundreds of millions of dollars for humanitarian work. Hospitals, schools, and relief programs reached countless communities. In Africa alone, more than 400 medical centers carried the BGEA name. Despite worldwide fame, Billy chose a simple life. He lived in a small cabin, wrote sermons late into the night, and flew on regular commercial planes. He believed fame only mattered if it helped others. Reporters praised him as the man who renewed faith for an entire century. Yet, away from the crowds, he often sat alone, quietly wondering if he was truly doing God's will. By the late 1970s, he was widely seen as the most powerful spiritual voice alive. That power became his hardest test. In 1980, at age 60, he began stepping away from leadership, handing daily responsibilities to his team. He spent more time writing, thinking, and reflecting on what success had cost him. As applause faded, Billy entered a quieter season of life, where belief and loneliness existed together. Behind the scenes stood Ruth Bell Graham, his wife and early companion. She chose to live apart, raise their children, and manage the house mostly on her own. She did not accuse him, she simply accepted that her husband now belonged more to the world than to his family. Billy felt the weight of that truth. In a private letter written in 1965 to his son Franklin, he confessed his fear that he had failed as a father. The letter, revealed years later, showed the regret of a man consumed by his mission. Their 5 children each faced their own struggles. Franklin rebelled in his youth. Ned battled addiction. One daughter endured painful marital troubles. Billy rarely interfered directly. Instead, he prayed for them every night, believing faith did not guarantee an easy path. When he returned from long trips, the house was often silent. Ruth had grown accustomed to it. She once wrote that Billy would sit for hours in the dark, staring out the window without speaking. When she asked what he was doing, he replied that he was talking to God. The answer was simple, yet it revealed the distance between them. In his 1997 autobiography, Billy openly admitted his flaws and said he needed forgiveness every day. The confession revealed a man who was never perfect, only sincere in his struggle. Then came a painful moment in the 1970s. Secret recordings from President Nixon surfaced, placing Billy in a crisis. Some of his words were taken as offensive towards Jewish people. When the tapes became public, he apologized without excuse, admitted his mistake, and stepped away from political discussion entirely. The incident haunted him for years, leaving him humbled and deeply reflective. Those close to him said he never complained. He prayed quietly, blamed no one, and moved forward. From that point on, Billy poured his life fully into preaching and helping others, carefully staying away from social and political battles. In the early 1980s, doctors diagnosed him with Parkinson's disease. As his strength faded, Billy made a difficult choice. He refused embryonic stem cell treatment, explaining that he could not save his own life by ending another. Even at the end, his moral line never moved. The years that followed were simple and calm. Billy lived quietly in a wooden home in Montreat. Each morning began the same way, with his Bible open, notes written carefully by hand. Visitors didn't find fame or glamour. What they saw was peace, shaped by a life that had known both applause and loneliness. Ruth stayed close to him, even though much of their time together was spent in silence. In her journal, she once wrote that words were unnecessary, that sitting quietly together was enough. When Ruth passed away in 2007, Billy attended her funeral without saying a word. He sat by her grave for hours, alone with his thoughts. After losing his wife, Billy slowly stepped away from public life. He embraced stillness. He wrote letters now and then to old friends, often saying he wasn't afraid of dying, only worried he hadn't done enough of what truly mattered. Around 2005, Billy wrote his will by hand. In it, he shared concern about his son Franklin, believing he could sometimes be too forceful. That document stayed private until after Billy's death, a final message from a father reflecting on faith, family, and an unfinished legacy. As his later years passed, Billy declined honors again and again. When offered a major medal, he gently said he would rather receive it after death. He didn't want to be remembered as a symbol. He wanted to be remembered as a man. When the crowds faded and the songs stopped, the real story began to unfold. On February 21, 2018, Billy Graham died peacefully at his home in Montreat. He was 99 years old. His funeral was simple. No speeches, no grand displays, no flowers, just as he requested. He was buried beside Ruth at the Billy Graham Library. The grass around his grave grows naturally. His tombstone carries only a few words. Pastor Billy Graham preached the gospel to the world. No titles, no praise. After his passing, sealed archives were slowly opened. Letters, journals, and hundreds of FBI files revealed parts of his life the public had never seen. For 22 years, he had been under government surveillance because of his global influence and relationships with world leaders. Every sermon, trip, and meeting had been recorded, yet no wrongdoing was ever found. One letter stood out. Written in 1963 by President John F. Kennedy just weeks before his assassination, it read, "I hope faith can keep America united." Billy never shared it publicly. He kept it private, a quiet bond between friends. In 2023, nearly 500 pages of final FBI documents were released. They detailed wiretaps and reports examining the role of religion in politics. The release sparks debate. Some saw the surveillance as proof of Billy's soft power. Others saw it as evidence that faith still mattered deeply in a changing world. After Billy's passing, his son Franklin Graham took over the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. His outspoken political views stirred controversy. Supporters believed he carried the torch. Critics felt he crossed lines his father never did. Billy himself had once written that he didn't want his son to copy him, only to follow his own calling. Through all the debate, scholars continued to study Billy's impact. Records show that over 3.2 million people embraced faith through his missions.
more than 1 million marriages were restored through his counseling work. Today, the BGEA operates in 100 countries, supporting education, relief efforts, and humanitarian aid. Hospitals, schools, and relief centers bearing his name remain active, living proof of a compassion that crossed borders. In 2025, an archival recording was released marking 75 years since his first Los Angeles crusade, the moment he became a global voice. That same year, his handwritten will was fully revealed. It ended with a single sentence: "Remember me as a sinner saved, not as a saint." Those words ended every argument. At the resting place of Billy and Ruth, there are no statues or flowers, just wild grass, tall pines, and a small stone resting in Carolina soil. Locals call it the Nameless Grave. To most, it looks like nothing special. To those who understand, it represents a life lived without display. Billy Graham didn't live two lives to deceive. He lived one life to fulfill his purpose. Across nearly a century, he walked from doubt to faith, from fame to silence. And when the lights finally went out, what remained was simple: a fragile man, steady in belief, faithful to the end. Subscribe now to keep uncovering hidden chapters of history, untold stories, and the lives that shaped our world.